Good afternoon, geography students. We're going to be continuing our discussion of Scandinavia. So you remember that's 5 countries: Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, which is south of Norway and Sweden, and then Iceland, the island nation out in the direction of Greenland, quite far from Europe, though it's usually lumped with European countries because of its ethnic, its cultural ties to Scandinavia are overwhelmingly strong, even though it's thousands of miles from Europe. But I wanted to talk now about the culture of these places. All 3 of the Germanic Scandinavian countries on mainland Europe, that's Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, are in fact constitutional monarchies like Great Britain. They have, I believe in all 3 cases, a king right now. The king has extremely limited authority, just like the Queen of England has virtually no actual authority. These monarchs are symbols of national unity. They're ties to the past, but they have virtually no political power because all 3 of those monarchies are pure democracies. They have impeccable records of giving the vote to the people, and the people vote for members of parliament. So the real power is in the hands of parliament and the prime minister, who is elected by parliament. So they're full democratic countries, full constitutional rights in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Finland is also a full democracy. It is a republic. They have a president rather than a king. But it is very much like the United States in its civil liberties, and its political system is similar. It's not a federal republic, it's a unitary state. And Iceland is also a republic. They have a president who is elected in Iceland, no monarch, but a president. It is a fully independent country, even though I believe the present population is less than 250,000. There are fewer people in Iceland than there are in, I think, in Arlington, Texas. This is a very big island, very sparsely, very sparsely populated. The city of Reykjavik is, I believe, less than 100,000 people. So, you are talking there about a city the size of Waco is the capital. Iceland is an interesting place geographically. It is a volcanic island. It's still very active volcanically. It's one of the most volcanically active places in the world. So the entire thing is essentially a giant shield volcano that has come up out of the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Because volcanic soil, when volcanic rock breaks down the soil, it's actually extremely nutritious for plants. A lot of things grow there in its short growing season, but of course it is very far north. So you don't get a whole lot of summer warmth and heat, but what they get when they get the summer warmth, things grow well there. But much of it is just grassland or even rocks covered with moss because it is cold. They do have a great deal of hydrothermal activity because of the volcanism, and a lot of their power is actually generated by thermal vents from volcanoes. Water boiled by volcano, making natural steam, generates a large portion of the electric power in Iceland. It's very green-friendly country, extremely green-friendly country. I think they've long been zero carbon emissions in Iceland. You probably know Greenland. I did talk about that. It's not an independent country, although they have autonomy. The Inuit people who live there basically run the show on Greenland. But Greenland is extremely lightly populated. I think it's well less than 100,000 people for a very large island. Most of the island, though, is covered by glaciers, although they seem to be melting at an alarmingly fast rate, pouring huge amounts of fresh water in the Atlantic Ocean. But, much of the island still is covered by ancient glaciers, go back many tens of thousands of years. Speaking of glaciers, when we move to Norway and, also in Iceland, but Iceland, Norway, Sweden, you find what are called fjords, F-J-O-R-D, fjord. A fjord is a very long, skinny inlet running from the open sea inland. They're not rivers. They're salt water. They're the sea coming in. What it is an extremely deep valley, long ago carved out by glaciers. So the glaciers scooped the soil out, and eventually they melted when it got to the sea. But then the sea rushed into this deep valley. So they're very, very steep. A fjord is very steep crevices, sometimes 500, 1,000 feet high, rising out of the sea, but only a quarter mile wide. Frequently, the towns and cities of Norway, for example, which has thousands of fjords on its coast. The whole thing is crenellated, like looking at a map of Norway. A detailed map of Norway is a striking thing to see, as the fjords. Most of the towns and cities of Norway are built at the very ends of fjords, way back up. So the fjord actually provides great protection from the storms that come in from the ocean and the like. But there's no getting your way around it. Norway is way on up there. In fact, Norway actually comes from North Way. There are also islands off the coast of Norway, and the North Way was these island protected way you could go north to the Arctic Circle in a boat with getting some shelter from those islands along the way. So that's why it was called the Norse Way, the North Way. But so much of inland, when you move inland in Norway and Sweden, you encounter mountains. Finland also has some mountains, but all of them are heavily forested. Remember we talked about the taiga, that old growth evergreen forest that circles the globe, Siberia, Alaska, northern Canada? That's in Scandinavia too. These very dense, very old evergreen coniferous forests. The taiga is up there too. Until you get very far north into Lapland, where the taiga gives way to tundra. But in the south of Norway, the very south of Sweden, some parts right along the southern coast of Finland, you do get plains, and in the summertime, you can grow agricultural products there. So there is agriculture in all of these countries. A great deal of the economy of all three is based on fishing. They have a very strong fishing fleet in all three of those countries. Denmark, I haven't said a lot about. Denmark is a very flat country. It's, I think, the highest place in all of Denmark is about 200 feet above sea level. It's a series of islands in one peninsula that juts to the north into dividing the Baltic Sea from the North Sea. But it's a very level country made out of islands. Copenhagen is on one of the larger islands. Copenhagen's its capital. Pardon. But Denmark is very much a country like Holland or Germany in its economy. It is a monarchy, but it's a fully democratic country. Now, one of the things that you should know about the Scandinavian countries, something that most Americans know about them, is they are people who admire democratic socialism. It's the Scandinavians they're thinking about. They have a long history now, going back a little less than 100 years, of democratic socialism in their polity. They're democratic countries, full elections, all that. There are people who don't approve 100%. But they are the ones who really pioneered the welfare state, cradle-to-grave services from the government. Now, this means they pay a lot in taxes. In the United States, I think the top tax bracket right now for us is 34% of your income. In Scandinavia, if you make more than a couple of $1 million, you can expect to give 90% of that to the government. But those high taxes pay for universal health care, universal education. The schools, the public schools of the Scandinavian countries are legendarily superb public schools. So they tax themselves massively, and then the government spends massively. Now, this is very different than the way Americans do. We like our autonomy. We like to have all these choices. Scandinavians, there's often just one option for most things because the government provides it. And a lot of Americans, I think, would find that unpleasant. I don't know. Some seem to admire it. Others not. Not my job to value anything politically. Not interested in that in the least. But I did want to call your attention to the fact that when people speak positively of democratic socialism, I guarantee you what they're thinking of is Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. They are poster children for this. That being said, They have had troubles. Their healthcare systems have been stressed economically in recent years. There's been some coverage of that in American news media that, maybe things aren't entirely rosy and all those things. But again, got to put an asterisk by that comment. Scandinavians on the whole seem very happy with this situation. In fact, I know for a fact that every year there's an organization that surveys people all over the world to gauge their general level of happiness in life. And do you know the country that has repeatedly placed the happiest country on earth most years? Denmark. And the other Scandinavians are right up there in the top 10. I think there's some Buddhist countries in the Himalayas that also rank well. They're very different. But the economies of all the Scandinavian countries are fully modern. There's a lot of high tech that goes on there. Volvos are Swedish cars. You probably know that. Those very safe cars, highly engineered cars. Saab, cars and planes in Swedish. They are very prosperous, highly educated people. Very strong sense of democracy and of human rights. Yeah, and apparently exceedingly happy people, which when you consider how long they spend in the winters there's a concept called hygge. Hygge, I hope I pronounced that right. That's a Danish word, I believe, hygge. But I think they all have it, which is kind of coziness or hominess. Just think about a cabin kind of snowed in with a nice roaring fire and big woolly blankets to snuggle under and drink your cocoa. That apparently is like a high value hygge in Scandinavia, and it might partly also account for their extremely high levels of happiness. Anyway, your assignment is to do a little research on 2 of the capital cities. Pick one and write me a short little paper on them. Look on GradeLink, you'll find it there. But I want you to either pick Reykjavik, Iceland, or Stockholm, Sweden, and write about something that's located in each of them or near it. You can Reykjavik, you might want to go out into the countryside and see a volcano or something. Find out what you do. If you were visiting either Reykjavik or Stockholm, what would you want to see? Why? And tell me a little something about the history or something about it to indicate you've learned something useful and interesting about either Stockholm or Reykjavik, Iceland. Okay, that'll do for now. God bless you.